Across a continent smoldering from 6 years of war, a plan began to take shape, one so reckless, so monstrously ambitious, that even the architects of the Reich hesitated to speak of it aloud. It was not conceived in the war rooms of Berlin, nor in the mind of Hitler himself, but in the fevered desperation of a crumbling empire that refused to accept defeat. The year was 1944. The Allies were closing in from the west, the Soviets from the east, and the once invincible Wehrmacht had become a shadow of its former self. But inside a cold underground chamber in Bavaria, a handful of Nazi scientists, officers, and engineers were preparing what they called Operation Feuerwind, the last weapon that would, as one officer wrote, either save the Reich or burn the world with it. The idea was born from paranoia and pride, a belief that if Germany could no longer win, it could at least ensure no one else would. In the archives recovered decades later, fragments of this plan still send chills, notes scrawled in red pencil, calculations smeared with coffee and sweat, the words Endlosungsvi, final solution too. But this was no genocide in the conventional sense. It was annihilation on a planetary scale. To understand how close it came to reality, we must go back to the spring of that year, when Allied bombers blackened German skies daily and the myth of Hitler's invincibility was crumbling. Desperation had bred insanity. The Reich's leading scientific minds, some coerced, some fanatically loyal, gathered under the supervision of SS General Hans Kammler, a man so ruthless and efficient that his subordinates called him the Ghost of Auschwitz. Kammler had overseen the construction of the death camps. Now, he had been given a new assignment: create a weapon that will make surrender impossible. The result was Feuerwind, a theoretical chain reaction using heavy water reactors and vast underground facilities carved into the mountains near Thuringia. The concept was simple in its madness: detonate a device capable of igniting the very air itself, a reaction that would consume oxygen across hundreds of kilometers. It wasn't nuclear fission as we understand it today. It was closer to a nightmare version of it, drawn from incomplete physics and apocalyptic ambition. The scientists argued among themselves. Some believed it could destroy entire cities in seconds. Others warned it could burn the atmosphere and end all life on Earth. To Kammler, that was not a deterrent, it was a promise. In the tunnels beneath the Harz Mountains, construction began. Thousands of prisoners were dragged from camps, skeletal men and women, forced to dig, to haul, to die in darkness. Witnesses later described hearing the walls hum from generators day and night. Trains arrived under cover of night, carrying strange cargo, barrels marked with radioactive symbols, glass tubes of heavy water stolen from Norway, and crates of uranium oxide. The air inside the tunnels smelled of ozone and fear. But Feuerwind was not merely a weapon of destruction. It was also psychological theater. Hitler's inner circle had begun to fracture. Goebbels preached total war from his propaganda office, while Göring's Luftwaffe lay in ruins. Himmler sought negotiations with the Allies behind Hitler's back. And somewhere in the midst of this chaos, Kammler presented his plan directly to the Führer. The meeting, according to one surviving memo, lasted less than 15 minutes. Hitler listened in silence, eyes distant, fingers tapping the map. Then, to the astonishment of everyone present, he said only, "Nein. Not this." Why? That question haunted historians for decades. Hitler had approved of extermination camps, scorched earth orders, and the use of nerve agents. What could possibly make him reject Feuerwind, his supposed miracle weapon? Some claim he feared the scientific uncertainty. Others believe, for the first time, he glimpsed the possibility of destroying even himself, his vision, his myth. Whatever the reason, Kammler did not stop. Weeks later, Allied spies intercepted fragments of coded transmissions referring to the Southern Vault and the weapon that burns without flame. British intelligence dismissed it as delusion, one of countless last-ditch Nazi fantasies. Yet reconnaissance photos showed vast new excavations in Thuringia, guarded by SS divisions who refused to surrender even as Germany collapsed around them. Something was being hidden. By late April 1945, as Soviet forces stormed Berlin, Kammler vanished. Some reports claimed he shot himself, others suggested he fled using one of the mysterious long-range aircraft under his command. In the chaos that followed Germany's surrender, American teams under Operation Paperclip raced to capture as many scientists as possible before the Soviets reached them. Among the seized documents were blueprints and notes for a project labeled Feuerwind A9. The diagrams were nightmarish, schematics for devices resembling primitive thermonuclear triggers, massive underground reactors, and what one engineer called the Earth Burner. The Americans dismissed it as pseudoscience, but one man, a physicist named Robert Serber, later involved in the Manhattan Project, reportedly remarked, "They were closer than we like to believe." The idea that a dying regime could nearly stumble into world-ending power haunted Allied intelligence for years. Meanwhile, rumors spread through occupied Germany. Villagers near the Harz Mountains told stories of nights when the sky glowed faintly blue and thunder rolled underground. One farmer claimed his livestock died overnight, skin burned, eyes clouded white. Locals whispered that the SS had tested something, a flash that made no fire but left shadows burned into stone. Allied officers dismissed it as hysteria. Yet radiation surveys conducted years later revealed unusual isotopic traces near one sealed shaft, levels too high to be explained by conventional munitions. When interrogated, captured scientists spoke carefully. Some denied everything. Others hinted that Feuerwind had reached the threshold. One, under duress, muttered only, "We saw the light." Then he bit his tongue and bled to death before further questioning. What remains certain is this: the Nazi regime, in its final months, was willing to gamble the existence of the world to avoid humiliation. And somewhere deep underground, the remnants of that gamble may still rest, sealed in forgotten concrete vaults that no one dares open. The true horror of Feuerwind was not that it succeeded, but that it almost did. For Hitler, the decision to cancel the project may have been the only act of restraint in a career defined by destruction. Whether it was fear, superstition, or the last flicker of human sanity, his rejection came too late to save millions, but perhaps, by sheer accident, saved the planet itself. In the archives of the U.S. Army, one final memo survives, stamped top secret and dated May 1945. It reads simply, "The enemy prepared a device that could alter the atmosphere. Recommend immediate suppression of all documentation." Public knowledge of this would cause panic. And so the story of Feuerwind vanished, buried not only under rubble but under silence. Until now. Because hidden among the mountains of Thuringia are tunnels still sealed with reinforced steel, their entrances overgrown with moss and guarded by signs warning of radiation. Locals say no one who's gone inside stays long. Instruments fail. Lights flicker. Compasses spin. Some claim to have heard the hum, the same low vibration that prisoners once described before the ground shook. Was it merely old machinery decaying in the dark? Or is something still active, half a century later, pulsing beneath the earth? Whatever the truth, the legacy of Feuerwind stands as the ultimate symbol of a regime that mistook terror for strength, and nearly proved that madness could end not just nations, but humanity itself. The files remain incomplete, the witnesses dead, the tunnel sealed. But one truth echoes louder than ever: the weapon was real enough to frighten even Hitler. And that, perhaps, says everything. When the Reich fell, the victors came not only to conquer but to uncover. Beneath the bombed-out fields of Thuringia, Allied search teams found shafts that sank deep into the rock, long corridors lined with rails and sealed steel doors that resisted even-shaped charges. Inside were rusted cranes, torn cables, and what one U.S. engineer described as machines that looked like they were built for the end of the world. There were fragments of graphite cores, scorched reactor plates, and barrels filled with blackened water that registered dangerously high on their Geiger counters. The soldiers didn't yet have the language to call it nuclear contamination. They only knew it made their skin crawl and their instruments scream. The documents seized in the nearby barracks painted a picture both brilliant and horrifying. Schematics spoke of atmospheric ignition chains, oxygen resonance, and thermal cascades. One file, scrawled in Kammler's own hand, read simply, "When we're sterben, soll die Welt mit uns brennen." If we die, the world must burn with us. It was not a metaphor. It was instruction. The SS general had believed in a godless apocalypse, one where Germany's death would take all life as tribute. Yet amid the madness, there were moments of grim sanity. Testimonies from captured engineers revealed that a handful of scientists had tried to delay the project, sabotaging calculations and exaggerating technical failures. They feared not the Allies but what their own leaders demanded of them. One survivor later confessed to American interrogators, "We realized we were no longer building a weapon, we were building the end." In the months that followed, Operation Feuerwind was quietly erased from official history. The Americans absorbed what they could, distributing documents among secret programs that would later become the seeds of the Cold War's nuclear race. The Soviets, having found parallel tunnels on their side of Germany, began their own inquiries, desperate to catch up. Both sides agreed on one thing: no one must know how close the Nazis had come to unlocking a weapon that could ignite the very sky. But rumors refused to die. In the nearby villages, locals spoke of lights that sometimes flickered above the old mining sites, of animals born hairless, of a constant faint buzzing under the ground. In 1951, a small geological survey sent by East German authorities reported unexplained magnetic disturbances in the region, along with isotopic anomalies that did not match any known natural deposits. The report was buried. What no one expected was that one of Kammler's assistants, an engineer named Erich Weber, had survived. He lived under a false identity in Argentina for over a decade before being found by a journalist in the early 1960s. Weber, frail and guilt-ridden, agreed to one interview before vanishing again. In it, he described standing inside the Thuringia tunnels in the final weeks of the war, watching a prototype reactor come to life. The air shimmered, he said, and the concrete walls began to sweat. The sound was like a choir of metal screaming, he whispered. Then, all at once, the lights went out. Kammler left that night. I never saw him again. When asked if the weapon could have worked, Weber hesitated. If we had finished it, he murmured, you would not be asking me this question. Historians who reviewed his account dismissed it as senile rambling. Yet fragments of his description matched classified U.S. reports from the 1940s, the dimensions of the tunnels, the reactor's unusual configuration, even the coded phrase A9 appearing in both sets of documents. Coincidence? Perhaps. Or perhaps Weber remembered what the world preferred to forget. As the decades passed, the legend of Feuerwind transformed. Conspiracy theorists claimed it was an early atomic test gone wrong. Others insisted it was a myth, a ghost story born from guilt. But those who studied the surviving documents saw patterns too deliberate to dismiss. One physicist, speaking anonymously in the 1990s, admitted that the Feuerwind calculations hinted at phenomena decades ahead of their time, and dangerously misunderstood. Still, official denial remained absolute. No government would confirm the existence of a Nazi plan that could have annihilated the world. The Cold War provided convenient cover. Too many new weapons were already being built to risk public panic over the ghosts of old ones. And yet, beneath the layers of secrecy, something persisted, an unease, a rumor that not all the tunnels had been sealed. Satellite imagery in the early 2000s revealed heat signatures beneath certain hillsides of Thuringia, faint but steady, as though something deep underground continued to hum. Environmental teams investigating groundwater contamination were abruptly recalled. Local authorities cited unstable terrain. Others whispered a different explanation, that Feuerwind still slept, its engines dormant but intact. The question then arises, why cancel it at all? Why, after building hell with his own hands, did Hitler pull back? Some argue he finally understood the futility of total destruction, that in those final days, as Berlin burned, even he could not stomach erasing the world he wanted to rule. But another theory runs deeper. A captured aide once claimed Hitler muttered that the fire must wait for another age. Whether it was superstition, megalomania, or the last delusion of a dying tyrant, we will never know. What is known is that Kammler's disappearance was no accident. American intelligence tracked a convoy matching his description fleeing toward the Alps, accompanied by crates marked with the same symbols found at Feuerwind's site. The convoy vanished in the chaos of surrender. No bodies were recovered. Decades later, reports surfaced of sealed chambers beneath the Austrian mountains, filled with machinery that no one dared to excavate. Among the rubble were gas masks, scorched documents, and a single steel plate engraved with the insignia of the SS Special Projects Division. To this day, treasure hunters and historians search those mountains. Some return with photographs of rusted tunnels. Others never return at all. The locals have a phrase for the place, der Atem des Teufels, the devil's breath. And maybe that's fitting. Because Feuerwind was never just a weapon, it was an idea, that power without restraint becomes self-destruction. It was a mirror held up to human arrogance, showing what happens when the will to dominate outweighs the will to survive. The world escaped by inches, not through wisdom, but through luck. A dictator's moment of hesitation may have been the only thing that kept blue skies above our heads. We live in the shadow of that decision every day, whether we know it or not. Even now, scientists occasionally stumble upon traces of that forgotten madness. Old declassified files from Los Alamos reference anomalous German research that inspired certain theoretical studies in atmospheric physics. Engineers who worked on early space propulsion projects quietly admitted to having reviewed captured Nazi documents about oxygen ignition under extreme heat. These fragments, scattered through history, whisper of how close humanity once came to annihilation not from malice, but from pride. And perhaps that is the true horror of Feuerwind. Not the device, not the tunnels, not the madmen who built them, but the knowledge that intelligence alone is never enough. Without morality, brilliance becomes a weapon aimed at the world itself. In the end, the mountains of Thuringia remain silent. The tunnels stay sealed, the steel doors rusting in darkness. Birds nest where guards once stood. Moss creeps across the concrete. And yet, when the wind shifts through the pines, locals swear they can hear it, a faint, steady hum rising from below, as if the earth itself remembers. Somewhere down there, beneath stone and soil, lie the remnants of the most dangerous dream ever conceived. A dream so insane, so catastrophic, that even Hitler turned away. But the idea it embodied, that power can erase consequence, still echoes in laboratories and boardrooms today. Every new weapon, every reckless experiment, every line crossed in the name of progress carries a shadow of Feuerwind with it. And so, the story remains unfinished, not buried in the past, but woven into the future. For the madness that almost consumed the world once waits only for men to forget why it terrified them. If the tunnels are ever opened again, if the hum beneath Thuringia ever grows louder, we will have no one to blame but ourselves. Because history does not forgive those who look into the abyss twice.